Donald Trump has won the presidency and his party now controls the United States Senate. And once he's inaugurated on January 20th, he will be in a position to further expand and entrench the Republican supermajority in the United States Supreme Court for decades. And I mentioned this previously in previous videos, but I think we need to do a deeper dive on it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, for context, I want to play a clip of Donald Trump speaking a few months ago. I think it was to the NRA, the National Rifle Association. And he was talking about the importance of appointing judges, and not just judges, but young conservative judges, just to really put this in perspective, because of course, it also reflects on Trump's vision and Republicans' vision for the highest, most powerful, most important court in the country, the Supreme Court.
It's interesting. I have a friend in New York. He wanted to be a judge so bad. And great lawyer, actually. When I won, he called me. He said, wow, do you believe it? A big real estate lawyer, phenomenal talent, and 69 years old. He said, unbelievable how you did this. Can I be honest? I'd love to give up my practice. He makes a lot of money. I'd like to give up my practice, and I'd like to run. I'd like to be a judge. I'd be a great judge, and he would be a great judge. And I called my people, and I told him, don't worry about it. You're going to be a judge. Congratulations. Then I called up my people, and I said, I have a guy from New York who's an incredible lawyer. He's got the right temperament. He'd be a really great judge. Oh, good, sir. How old is he? I said, he's 69, sir. So he's going to be there for 2, 3, 4 years. We like people in their 30s, so they're there for 50 years or 40 years. We don't want, and as soon as they said that, I realized, yeah, they're exactly right. So I called up my friend. I said, you're phenomenal. We love you, love you, love you. But will you guarantee that you're going to be there for 25 years? Well, I can't do that. Good. Then I can't appoint you.
So they're laughing because, of course, I mean, it makes sense, right? It absolutely makes sense. By the way, if a Democrat, I should say President Biden had won re-election or Vice President Harris had won re-election, if a Democrat were going to be in power on January 20th moving forward, I would also advise them to do the same thing. Find a young liberal, young progressive judge, put them in there. That way they can help shape the trajectory and jurisprudence of the court for decades to come. But Democrats are so far behind the 8 ball on this. Republicans realized this decades ago. And for all of their for all of the moral failure of Republican leadership, and I maintain Republican elected figures are terrible, terrible people, an authoritarian cult with no limiting principle, and I have very little faith that they will do anything to check Donald Trump's worst impulses in this second term. Very little doubt. But one thing they do understand is playing the long game in certain respects, particularly with regards to the judiciary. This attitude is something that Donald Trump can and will apply to the United States Supreme Court. There's no age requirement to sit on the nation's highest court. And, the New Republic just is now talking about this in the aftermath of yesterday's election, or excuse me, the November 5th elections, 2 days past. Liberals just lost the Supreme Court for decades to come. There are many dire consequences of Kamala Harris's loss to Donald Trump. This is one of the worst, arguably in the long run, perhaps the worst. And I should say, as a reminder, we have not had a liberal majority court in 50 years. The last time we had a liberal majority court, it was Roe v. Wade. That was one of the final, court cases of a liberal majority court. It's been 50 years. And now we may not have another one for another 50 years. We may truly have a century, at least before us, of conservative courts. That's where we are. That's how bad this is. Liberals just lost the Supreme Court for decades to come. There are many dire consequences of Kamala Harris's loss to Donald Trump. This is one of the worst. Every presidential election is about control of the Supreme Court, even if many Americans don't consciously realize it. By electing Trump on Tuesday and turning over the Senate to firm Republican control, voters guaranteed that all but the youngest of them will live under a deeply conservative high court for the rest of their lives. I want to stop just there. I'll repeat it again. Voters guaranteed that all but the youngest of them will live under a deeply conservative high court for the rest of their lives. We as voters made that decision. Obviously not individually, because I voted for Kamala Harris and the Democrats. I'm sure many of you did as well. But collectively as a nation, we made that decision. The two oldest members of the court are both conservatives. Clarence Thomas is 76, Samuel Alito is 74. Since 1990, the average age of the Supreme Court justices at the time of their retirement is 83 years old. A Kamala Harris presidency would not have guaranteed that Democrats appointed their replacements, of course, but it would have at least denied the opportunity to Republicans for another 4 years. That possibility is gone now, and the strategic retirement on two on the court's right flank is much more likely. Alito has never discussed publicly his potential retirement, as is typical for the justices, but when he was surreptitiously recorded earlier this year, many court watchers took note of his wife's hint that he might not be on the court much longer. Quote, "I want a Sacred Heart of Jesus flag because I have to look across the lagoon at the Pride flag for the next month," Martha Ann Alito said in the recordings, referring to controversies over flag flying at their house and her discussions with her husbands on it. Quote, "I said, when you are free of this nonsense, I'm putting it up," hinting that he may strategically retire under a Republican president with a Republican Senate, and now he's about to get both. And I should also note, the controversy around the flags, I know I talked about it and others talked about it as well. It's worth noting, and I mentioned this in a previous video, Chief Justice John Roberts took away a court opinion from Alito. Samuel Alito was supposed to be writing a majority opinion pertaining to a Trump-related, January 6th related case. And a few days after learning about the, insurrectionist flag being flown at the Alito household, Chief Justice Roberts took the unprecedented step of taking that case away from Alito, suggesting that Chief Justice Roberts also saw, that's a bit sus, that's a bit, sketchy, and people may look at, that flag and Alito writing this opinion as, evidence of impropriety, so I'm going to take that case away from him. And he still didn't recuse himself. Anyway, Thomas, for his part, apparently hopes to stay on the court for as long as he can. The New York Times reported in 1993 that he told one of his clerks he planned to serve on the court until 2034. When asked by that specific year, Thomas's answer was straight to the point. "The liberals made my life miserable for 43 years, and I'm going to make their lives miserable for 43 years, he reportedly said. Jesus. Wow, I missed that part. Even before Tuesday, the judicial math for Democrats was dire. The three justices appointed by Trump in his first term were young by judicial standards. Gorsuch was 49 at the time of his confirmation. Kavanaugh was 53, and Amy Coney Barrett was 48. All of them could easily serve on the Supreme Court until the 2060s, and their replacement of older justices meant Democrats already faced a difficult path to flipping the court to the liberals within the next 10 or 15 years. That time horizon is now closer to 30 or 40 years. Trump's inauguration in January will have an immediate impact on the court's work. The justices have already heard oral arguments in 9 cases where the Biden administration is a plaintiff or a defendant. More are on the court's docket for the months to come. Not all of them will be affected by the change in administrations, but cases on environmental law and the Second Amendment could see the Trump Justice Department revise the government's position. Because, of course, if those cases are still pending when the transition occurs, Donald Trump's new DOJ can actually change position or withdraw the case. An open question is how much the justices will intervene in some of Trump's policy plans. Some of his proposals, such as the purge of federal civil service, are legally dubious. There will almost certainly be court battles over his mass deportation plans and his proposed invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to carry them out. Congress sets the federal budget, not Elon Musk. It's hard to imagine that the justices will exert themselves to constrain Trump on some of these policies, especially when he now has a clear Democratic mandate to enact them. In the long term, the court's conservative majority will likely continue its ongoing work. The justices will make it easier to limit or scale back federal regulations. Civil rights laws will come under challenge. The court has already teed up a case that could make it impossible to challenge racial gerrymandering via the Voting Rights Act. More ambitious goals like enshrining federal personhood in the Constitution or overturning the ruling that protects same-sex marriage nationwide could now gain traction in the conservative legal movement. The Trump-era elections have highlighted a deeper shift in how the court and its members understand their roles in public life. Supreme Court justices serve until retirement or death, and so on and so forth. Okay, and it goes on like this. I'm not going to bore you all with the rest of it, even though I find this really interesting. But you get the picture, which is something I mentioned in a couple of videos in the aftermath of Trump's victory, which is we already have a 6-3 conservative supermajority, and of that 6 conservative supermajority, Trump has already appointed 50% of it. And if and when Alito and Thomas retire, he will have created not just a 6-3 conservative supermajority, but a 5-seat MAGA majority. Donald Trump will have appointed 5 Supreme Court justices. And who knows, maybe Chief Justice Roberts would retire. Listen, I would bet the farm that Thomas and Alito retire, putting it at 5. I wouldn't put it past Roberts, who gave Trump the immunity decision, right? I mean, with a staggering pro-Trump ruling, I wouldn't be surprised if he just swats his hand and says, I'm done with this too. Go ahead and appoint my replacement. That would bring Trump to 6. And here's the scary thing. Liberal justices Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, not particularly young. And one of them, I think it's Sotomayor, is a lifelong diabetic who has to actually walk around with a medic. She has to have a medic nearby. So it's not outside the realm of possibility something bad happened to her, and that would put the number at 7. There are multiple timelines in the multiverse where Donald Trump has appointed 7 of the 9 Supreme Court justices. That's where we are. That's where we are. And we could be living with that for decades. So many bad things potentially coming from a Trump administration and a Republican majority, which, again, collectively, we gave them. We gave them that. 15 million Democratic voters who voted in 2020 didn't turn out to vote for Kamala Harris and the Democrats. Again, we talked about that. I don't want to relitigate it. Some of the blame is clearly on Harris, right? The candidate has an obligation to try to court voters, but voters also have agency. And when they vote for the opposition or they choose not to vote at all, it's on them too. And we all have to live with the consequences of both the candidates' failures and the voters' failures, all of us. It's sad. This is really dangerous. And I should also say, some people will, okay, well, get Kagan and Sotomayor to retire strategically, and President Biden can confirm their replacements in the lame duck. Well, that would require the cooperation of Democratic Senators Joe Manchin Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and former Democratic Senator turned independent Kyrsten Sinema. And we have no guarantee. As a matter of fact, Manchin has already said he would not vote to confirm another Supreme Court justice without Republican support. And Republicans will absolutely withhold that support because they salivated the prospect of further stacking the court in their favor. That's where we are. This is incredibly dangerous, incredibly serious. And all these challenges were incredibly difficult from the begin with. Like, it was always going to be difficult to deal with these challenges. And now that very steep hill has become nearly a sheer cliff. That's where we are. You guys got to be thinking about this. I'm thinking about it, especially again, as we start to think about what the next election cycle, the midterms, could potentially look like. Still a chance for us to course correct, but those paths are narrower, and Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans with their newfound power are going to try to make it even harder. That's where we are. Food for thought. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.